following is a national address by Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, Prime Minister and Minister for Public Administration, Home Affairs, National Security, Youth Development, Disaster Management, and ICT.
Fellow Grenadians, as we come to the end of March 2021, it is important for us to take stock of the challenges and successes of the past year, most of which we have spent dealing with the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. When the decision was made to implement a national lockdown to protect our borders and our people, no one could have envisaged that a year later we would still be wearing masks and having to adhere to the various recommended protocols. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a long, unprecedented, and almost immeasurable impact on the entire world, from its unimaginable health and psychosocial implications to the reversal of economic growth worldwide. Here in Grenada, we must acknowledge how fortunate we are not to have faced so far a true health crisis on the scale that some of our closest neighbors are now grappling with. Sadly, though, the fact that we have managed so well has created a sense of complacency among some of our people, a situation that can have dire consequences for the entire population. The latest daily COVID-19 dashboard produced by the Ministry of Health shows that we currently have one active case, which is import-related. Nevertheless, there is still cause for concern, since it has been identified as a UK variant, which health experts say is deadlier and more transmissible. Sisters and brothers, with the exception of December 2020 cluster, we have been consistently able to identify COVID-19 cases among arriving travelers due to our stringent entry protocols, and that speaks volumes for the efficacy of that approach. Through the continued dedication of our frontline workers, we will maintain that approach to safeguard the people of this country. Government, through initiatives led by the Ministry of Health, the COVID Subcommittee, and the Cabinet, will continue to spearhead the fight against COVID-19. But we must acknowledge our individual responsibility to protect ourselves and each other. This is not the time to engage in actions that can jeopardize public health and undermine all the successes recorded in the management of this pandemic locally. We have come too far for that. Too many of our fellow men and women have had to cope with the harsh impact of the pandemic for us to do anything that would prolong this period of suffering. My friends, sisters, and brothers all, our country has been highly recognized at the regional and international levels for its astute management of the health crisis. Just recently, the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention ranked Grenada at its lowest travel risk rating, level 1, making it one of the few countries in the Caribbean to have that ranking. However, we cannot rest on our laurels. We must continue to maintain the recommended protocols. And all of us as citizens of this country have an important role to play in this regard. All of us, from captain down to cook. As Prime Minister, I am particularly aware of this responsibility, and I try my best to lead by example. I try to abide by the laws and by consistently adhering to the recommended protocols. Though it is difficult and contrary to my love for people and my usual social interactions, I have adjusted my lifestyle to refrain from large social gatherings. This in itself is painful for me. But we must all recognize the need for personal sacrifices as part of this ongoing fight against COVID-19. The sacrifices we make now, sisters and brothers, will help to ensure that our country is not sidelined on the path to recovery. In other words, sisters and brothers, we should be prepared to make the sacrifices today that will ensure a safer tomorrow. I encourage one and all to do their part in this ongoing fight. I therefore call on the church and community leaders, trade union leaders, business leaders, all influential persons in our society, that we have a duty and a responsibility to lead by example and to encourage appropriate actions among those who look to us for guidance. Let us do the right thing for our people and for our country. Let us safeguard our future amidst the many uncertainties in the current global environment. Sisters and brothers, the successes recorded as a country are only possible because of our collective commitment as a people to following the recommended protocols. We must continue to work together to keep our country, ourselves, and our fellow brothers and sisters safe. This pandemic must be at the center of all that we do. We should not conveniently separate our actions or a specific cause from its potential impact as far as this health crisis is concerned. We must remain mindful that although a COVID-19 management plan has been relatively successful, all it takes is for a few or even one undetected case to create far-reaching consequences for our society. Just this week, the Commissioner of Police confirmed the rise in the number of illegal immigrants detected in Grenada. This is quite alarming, particularly when we consider the potential health implications. Therefore, safety must be our number one priority at all times. My friends, as leader of this country and as a citizen, it pains me to see that some of our teachers and the leadership of the Grenada Union of Teachers feel the need to engage in protest action in the middle of a global health crisis, and particularly so during a state of emergency, and breaking the laws of the land while doing so. government has repeatedly reaffirmed that the 4% increase is rightly due to public officers. But what we are saying is that we cannot afford to pay now. Let us stop for a minute and reflect. Remember, this is the same government that in the past contract cycles has negotiated in good faith, pushing for timely agreement with trade unions so that the public officers can receive their increases on time and not long after they were due. This is the same government that concluded negotiations with the trade unions in November 2019, agreeing to a 4% hike for each year for the period 2020, 2021, and 2022. Promptly started the payments also in January 2020 and continued to pay the increases throughout 2020 every month, despite the sharp decline in revenue for most of the year. This is the same government that paid all public officers their salaries and allowances in full and on time during the early stages of the pandemic, when most public officers, including teachers, were at home. However, the inescapable reality now is that a significant shortfall in revenue caused by the pandemic has necessitated tighter controls on government's expenditure on recurrent budget items such as wages and salaries. By the same token, it is true that government has incurred significant additional expenses in recent months, some brought about by the fallout from the pandemic and the need to provide support to various sectors of the economy, and some, such as the repurchasing of the Grenlec shares, which was necessitated by an arbitration ruling that required action within a stipulated time, failing which the entire country, your country, could have been adversely affected. Did you know that failure to honor the arbitration ruling could have led to action being taken to put a hold on all government monies, no matter where they are? Had this happened and allowed to happen, government services and spending would have been disrupted. Even the monthly payment of salaries to public officers. It was the decisive action of the government to repurchase the shares that avoided this possible interruption in its operations. Sisters and brothers, fellow Grenadians, what must be understood here is the distinct difference between recurrent and capital expenditure. Recurrent or continuing expenditure includes wages and utility bills, which are paid from revenue generated within the current fiscal year. The capital side of the budget provides for expenditure on developmental projects, asset acquisition, or other such initiative that represents an investment and fosters serious development. The responsible fiscal management policies adopted and maintained by this government prevents us from using money allocated in the annual budget for capital expenditure on recurrent expenses. Failure to abide by this will jeopardize millions of dollars in additional funding that Grenada can receive from donor agencies and development partners. In 2020, friends, Grenada benefit from $133 million in financing support and debt relief from the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, G20, the Caribbean Development Bank, and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. So far this year, we have been able to attract $78 million in external support. These sums have helped to facilitate the additional spending government has incurred in providing relief to some sectors, purchasing the necessary protective gear for frontline workers, investing in the educational infrastructure to ensure our young people are not left behind, and creating a safer environment in schools, among other areas. Expenditure continues to exceed revenue collection. Therefore, government must continue to aggressively mobilize additional resources to meet expenditure demands in 2021. I ask this: are we willing to sacrifice the desires of a few when the future of the entire population is at stake? The reality of our current fiscal situation is this: the financial implications of the pandemic caused a revenue shortfall of $96.6 million in 2020. Just think about that. With revenue collection in some months decreasing by as much as 50% when compared to the same period in 2019. Although the economy is slowly recovering, revenue collection is still below projected numbers and far lower than what was generated in 2019, when the agreement with the trade unions was signed, and this must be noted. Statistics from the Ministry of Finance show a continued variation in revenue collection. In January and February this year, government collected $30.1 million less than it did in the same period in 2020. However, we are optimistic about the continued recovery. But the fact remains that the revenue shortfall considerably affects the money that is available for recurrent expenditure. For the avoidance of doubt, this revenue, collected monthly, is a source of funds for the wages and salaries of public officers. The overriding message, therefore, here is that we must, at all costs, protect the future of this country. Any actions that undermine the economic stability we have sacrificed long and hard to achieve since 2013 would nullify those very sacrifices and jeopardize the future of this country and our children and grandchildren. Sisters and brothers, what must be pointed out as well is that the projection for growth in 2021 is 6%. But this will not take us back to the pre-COVID levels of real growth. In 2020, the country experienced negative growth of 12.2%. The reality is, it will take 2 to 3 years for our GDP to recover from that significant level of output loss experienced in 2020. That said, we remain guardedly optimistic that the recovery process will continue and the rate of recovery will improve. Therefore, tonight, I say to you all in honesty, and here I speak specifically to public officers, there is no question of if government will pay the 4% increase. Our track record in this regard speaks for itself. It is rather interesting that some of the same individuals who are calling on government to pay the 4% now did nothing to advance the cause of public officers when they had the opportunity to do so between 2008 and 2013. That aside, my message to all public officers is this: you are entitled to your increase. You will be paid your increase. But let us all be realistic. Thousands of your sisters and brothers forced into unemployment by the pandemic and are left without an income are also looking to government for much needed help to survive this serious crisis. Your elderly relatives, our treasured senior citizens, still require help buying medication and other basic amenities. Your sons and daughters still rely on government scholarship and educational help to continue their quest for higher education. Public officers, we recognize and appreciate your many sacrifices. You represent the backbone of government's operations. But at the same time, this is a government for all people. We take seriously our responsibility to look after the needs of all our people. Should we ignore the needs of the thousands of taxi drivers, vendors, hotel workers, and others whose livelihoods are linked to the tourism sector? Should we ignore the desperate needs of the road workers who, for 3 months into the year, have not yet earned a single dollar? Should we allow the international airport to close, removing one of the sources of government revenue, eliminating a critical export avenue for fishers and farmers, and cutting off our link to the world? Any responsible, conscientious government will find a way to balance its many responsibilities. And that is exactly what this government is doing. Trying to ensure that none of our citizens are disenfranchised while we safeguard the future of our beloved land, notwithstanding the current challenges. My dear sisters and brothers all, I am confident that we will get past this. Life will regain a sense of normalcy. Livelihoods endangered by the pandemic will restart, and our economy will resume its trajectory of growth. The signs are there. The St. George's University, which represents about 25% of our GDP, is looking to resume on-campus operations later this year. This by itself will have a positive domino effect on the various sectors of our economy, including those for the farmers, fishers, supermarkets, and the general retail sector, as well as accommodation sectors. The St. George's University is currently engaged in several expansion and redevelopment projects as it continues to play a key role in meeting increased global demand for physicians and healthcare personnel. Additionally, several hotels are on course to reopen in the coming months. In fact, Sandals Grenada resumed operations today, with close to 400 of its staff back on the job. Government continues to invest heavily in its public sector investment also, creating hundreds of jobs and spurring serious economic development in our country. Similarly, there continues to be a significant level of investor confidence in the local economy, manifested through the several construction projects which are underway. and which are also creating tremendous job opportunities for all our people. 1 year after Grenada recorded its first COVID-19 case, the big question is, how do we get past this stumbling block? How do we begin to recover from the devastating impact of a pandemic that is still unfolding? How do we reactivate our economy? How do we get our people back to work? How do we resume the level of social activities that is so much a part of the Grenadian tradition? How do we lighten government's load and enable it to honor its outstanding commitment to public officers? Multiple questions, legitimate questions, all pointing to a single solution. To successfully get to the post-COVID-19 chapter, we must get vaccinated. The experts call it herd immunity, and it is only by getting a significant portion of our population vaccinated that we will be able to achieve it. I have done my part the best I can. I've already received my first dose of the vaccine. In another few weeks, based on the revised guidance from the World Health Organization, WHO, on the timing of the second doses, I'll receive the second dose. Vaccination holds the key to any possible return to life as we knew it. If we fail to get on board, we run the risk of being left behind as the rest of the world goes back to normal. Some countries are already identifying vaccination as an entry requirement for all visitors. Some airlines are making vaccination mandatory for travelers, and as the cruise industry prepares to set sail again, some cruise lines are already outlining vaccination requirements for both passengers and crew. Therefore, as our entertainers prepare to resume international appearances, and as our cruise ship workers prepare to head back to work, they will all have to be vaccinated. And for those who engage in travel for leisure or for even medical purposes, you will face similar requirements. Therefore, you ought to start making preparations by getting vaccinated today. Here in Grenada, to help protect our frontline workers, all accommodation facilities providing quarantine for inbound travelers will be required to have all their staff vaccinated soon. A few short months ago, we saw how rapidly the case numbers rose when employees at one hotel contracted the disease. With deadlier variants of the coronavirus now in circulation around the world, we must take all the necessary measures to protect our people and at the same time allow them to continue their livelihoods. I therefore encourage everyone who meets the eligibility criteria to get vaccinated. Despite the heavy global demand for COVID-19 vaccines, government has obtained 23,000 doses of AstraZeneca, a good start as we seek to vaccinate at least 60% of the adult population. My friends, my sisters and brothers all, in closing, I urge you to protect yourselves, protect your loved ones, protect your neighbors, and protect your country. We are all in this together. Therefore, We must all work together to safeguard our people, our country, and our future. And as we approach the holiday weekend, I wish everyone a happy Easter. And as you partake in activities to celebrate this serious religious observance, remember to adhere to the recommended protocols. Wear your mask, wash your hands or sanitize frequently, and do not engage in large social gatherings. Stay safe, my brothers and sisters. I thank you.
The preceding was a national address by Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, Prime Minister and Minister for Public Administration, Home Affairs, National Security, Youth Development, Disaster Management, and ICT.